lot of my people don't know who you are, but most of them would be very, very interested. So I would say, so who, so this is a way to introduce yourself to, I have a 15-year-old and 13-year-old boys now. So
okay.
I want this thought process to be relevant to them in the future. So I have the luxury of actually having you here. So who are you, William Irwin Thompson?
I'm basically a writer and use many genres, from poetry, which is where I, first started out in high school, and a novel and nonfiction essays, cultural history, philosophy, ecology. So I've written in many different genres, but basically I am a writer. I have been an academic and have, taught at various universities and functioned as a visiting professor from Honolulu to Cambridge. At the present time, as 80 years old, I'm retired, and Lindisfarne was closed down. The association and the fellowship I created with 3 different campuses, one in the Hamptons, the next one in Manhattan that you saw, and then the third one in the Rockies when the Undersecretary of the UN, Maurice Strong, who created the Stockholm Conference on the Global Environment, donated land to Lindisfarne. And I ran conferences and programs.
What were some of the key ideas in Lindisfarne?
Well, we were basically talking about everything that has now become public. We started talking about the shift from economics to ecology as the governing science. We were talking about climate change and appropriate technology and the union of green technologies. All of this stuff we were talking about in the 70s. So we started the discussion. But the people who necessarily start a movement are not necessarily the ones who are recognized when it becomes popular or it becomes a mass phenomenon. So a lot of the ideas that you would take for granted, we started. So
are there any ideas that are kind of proliferating now that would you want to kind of communicate what was the beginning of those ideas, or any theme?
Well, planetization itself, though I credit Teilhard de Chardin using the phrase, but these issues that I talked about long ago in 1971 in my book, At the Edge of History, are now public issues. And so some of these things I personally started, and
such as
bringing together economics, appropriate technology, green technologies, Jerry Brown politics, the Rockefellers, and calling for a kind of new planetary governance. We started all that with the Lindisfarne conferences. I started all of that. Does your 13-year-old realize that? No, of course not.
No. So do you see anything in the current culture that maybe can plant the seeds of, or any, not hope, because I think what you said was a great reminder for me that, there's ebbs and flows. There's dying off, and then and that's fascinating that the trees need to burn for them to continue to grow.
Yeah.
But so let's get to that part in a little bit. Let me go back down with my question. So we have who you are, what you do, and I know how you did it, but I think something that was interesting is that you could talk about something esoteric and also something scientific at the same time. And I think that is, that's what I always found fascinating, and how you tied it.
That's because I was at MIT, so I was teaching, young engineers and scientists, and so I learned to try to, integrate science with what I was doing. So I met Werner Heisenberg in Germany, and the quantum physicist Arthur Zients was a Lindisfarne Fellow. And so all of that was very much part of my program, my project. As I said, this goes way back before the counterculture. Gerald Hurd and the Vedanta movement in Ojai, California, that was going on in the 40s. Everybody had heard of Alan Watts, but not Gerald Hurd. Well, he was the beginning. Do people, you have to be a cultural historian to be really interested in these seeds of transmission, the Buddhists would call it, mind-to-mind transmission.
The scenes of transmission?
Seeds.
Seeds, right, of course.
And so, there is a transmission process. Sometimes it's quite dramatic, as with Shaktipat with Muktananda that you and I experienced. And other times it can be indirect. I thought that I had created the genre or discipline of cultural phenomenology, where you combine anthropology and cultural history and you get cultural phenomenology. So I'm not just saying writing history of who killed whom with what, when, which is, if you look at the History Channel, it's the military channel. It's about who killed who with what,
right.
Caesar, Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Eisenhower, and that's boys' history. And girls' history is how to buy nice things for your Texas oil millionaire husband and go to Europe and bring back a lot of art and touchy-feely stuff. So the culture has always been sexually dimorphic and split. And so part of the counterculture was to bring feminism in together with science and technology. And so we had women who were part of Lindisfarne, like Hazel Henderson and Nancy Todd, and Mary Catherine Bateson. So they've been definitely part of the, the program from the very beginning.
So why did you go down this path? Or why was there something, in the previous section, you told me kind of your whole path growing up in LA and things like that. But what's the big why? Do you feel that you had some calling or some?
Well, when you're an adolescent, Piaget talks about the formation of the child and the adolescent in his books, the child psychologist Jean Piaget. And I met him too, or heard his lectures. And I think it was in Toronto, because he lectured in French, but that's a digression. But when I grew up reading in high school, Emerson and Whitman and Thoreau and American transcendentalists, and so I was motivated by that kind of idealism that it wasn't simply enough to sit in a library. It was important to embody these ideas. I think there's somebody who said the man screaming in the street distilled his frenzy from the scribblings of an academic writer 2 generations back. It's like Hegel and Marx and Lenin. And so that societal process is been with us, for a long time.
Wow. So I get it. It's, I was an evergreen poet, and it's interesting for me now personally that I was more on the recording, and I was a poet, and I wrote some theatrical things in school, and I'm going to get back to some writing projects. But so this is a good tie-in to this other question. So there, in the 80s, there was this thing called the Whole Life Expos. It was really
the Whole Earth Catalog with Stuart Brand, and
right. But then
he was a Lindisfarne Fellow and was part of our group.
Who's that?
Stewart.
Yeah, of course. And he spoke at these, and he had his own events.
And I went actually to the Whole Earth Jamboree, and I was at those meetings in California.
Right, and then in the 80s, there was a movement of like these expos, like in the New Yorker Hotel or the Hilton even, where there's 100 booths, and Dick Gregory would speak, and he was a firebrand, but Stuart Brand, and it felt like it was a movement. You know, it was a groundswell. It was kind of like the 60s energy was grounded in the New Age movement or the human potential movement, next step. And then, so I was excited to be part of that. For the most part, I was recording and helping get other people's message out. And then something I've noticed, about 10 years ago, there was this thing called, maybe 7-8 years ago, Wisdom 2.0 conference, which started about 7 years ago, and it was like in Silicon Valley, and it was like founders of Twitter and Facebook, and John Kabat-Zinn and Roshi Halifax, Joan Halifax, and it was like 350 people a few years ago, and now it sells out at 3,100 people. It's like a whole thing. And it's mindfulness. So I'm finding, like, you know, that it's reminding me somehow in this scheme of things of in the 80s, when it was become all this kind of esoteric ideas were now mainstream. And I didn't, 5 years ago, I couldn't tell my friend what meditation was. He would say, that's wacky. Now my friends are getting older, and if you tell them that, they're taking a medication that has a side effect, and I could say, oh, they prove that if you sit and breathe for 10 minutes, it's as effective or more effective, and there's no side effects. Now all of a sudden mainstream is, because
Well, I think that's been going on, even in my generation. So meditation, what I tried to do was, in the planetization of the esoteric, to bring all the esoteric branches of the world religions together. Now, the World Council of Churches brought clergymen together who were, really mediocre people. They're not philosophers, scientists, poets. They're just clergy. They're boring, And I would say that Joan, in a lot of the stuff she puts on Facebook, has become a clergyman. She's giving a lot of sermons. I couldn't finish her new book because it's just preaching to her disciples, not speaking to her colleagues anymore. And originally Joan had, Francisco Varela and I as colleagues, and she's decided to give that up for a mass audience. And that's so intrinsically American. I mean, you go back to Dale Carnegie and positive thinking and American boomerism. I mean, what the genius of Yogananda was, is he came from, there's a book called Calcutta Yoga that looks into the roots of all this. It's a very interesting book. But he joined esoteric yoga and the elevation of Kundalini and initiation through the chakras and the etheric body with self-help and boomerism and positive thinking and Dale Carnegie. And he created this self-realization fellowship. Which is a very non-Indian kind of thing. It's completely American. So that was his trip in the first wave of the planetization that included Vedanta having its center in Ojai, California. This is long before, a whole generation of 20 years before.
Right. So now I think, especially with the age of digital distraction, and my boys, I have thousands of hours in the basement of audio recordings of like these archives, Francisco Varela,
but it's ultra long. It's got to be in 2 minutes. I think what Stewart wanted is everybody to have a 3-minute pitch, because nobody's got time to sit for an hour for a podcast, and people's attention span is short, and you click and go to people's websites. So the medium now is not radio or FM or KPFK or any of that. It's the web.
And now my boys, they have Instagram. So
I've never gotten into that, or I'm on Facebook because it's a convenient way to stay tracking with Joan Halifax, and
and that's how I tracked you down. So I'm glad you're on Facebook.
Yeah.
So here's a question. So what do you?
You interviewed me long ago in the '80s at the cathedral, so you knew about me.
Oh, for sure. But I didn't interview, but I recorded you. I recorded the conferences, and we used to make the tapes available for people to buy and pay your royalties and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend for these new digital natives to manage all the digital distraction? Any thoughts on that?
Well, because I come from the culture of meditation, that's not an issue for me. If a person has a nervous, noisy mind and he's just constantly bombarded and doesn't know how to center down and meditate and devote an hour a day to silence and quiet, I don't know how to help them. I mean, I do it the traditional Klaka way and meditate for an hour or more a day. But I feel my era, I'm more the person who likes to initiate things and then not necessarily market it and sell it. I'm not a merchandiser or a marketer. And the culture, it's what Weber calls the routinization of charisma. I'm much more
the routinization of
charisma. It's Max Weber's phrase, the sociologist. So in starting things, I like the charismatic ideational. The routine operational, I drop out. And so when the salesmen take over, I say bye-bye. And so when St. Paul fucks up Christianity by trying to compete with the Gnostics and, turn it into and write and construct a historical Jesus that probably has nothing to do with the real Jesus, I am not interested at all. And so those guys, I just vacate the show. So my time is over. Your kids don't know me. My books don't sell. The IRS closed down Lindisfarne in 2009. I retired from lecturing and having Lindisfarne meetings in 2012. I'm 80 years old. I'm over. I'm done. I'm not in the culture anymore.
No, but I think, you're alive and kicking and your brain is phenomenal. So I'm glad to, that you're, affording some time for this. And, kind of a random question. You worked with the Disney Corporation years ago. Is that right? Did you just?
No, I consulted for 1 week, I think, and I went to meetings in Orlando because they were, and I was turned off by the whole experience. They wanted my advice on, I think, building building Disneyland in Paris, in the suburbs outside Paris, and creating a second Disney World. So I took the interview consulting gig, but it was like a day in Orlando. It wasn't a big chunk of my life.
Right.
And I think they found that I wasn't a congenial organization man to work with. So, they found other people that were more simpatico with their, worldview.
Okay.
Your son is knocking?
Yeah, that's my son. Come say hello to my son. This is my son, Sam. He's going to camp.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm up in Portland, Maine. Where are you guys?
Teaneck, New Jersey.
Teaneck, New Jersey. Okay. All right.
So I have just one more question, then we have to do.
All right, I'll scoot out, but
Yeah, we're going.
Okay.
The last question. Okay.
Great.
All right.
I'm going back up.
Okay, thanks. So if there was, so my whole reason for doing this on a kind of bigger level is, let me ask it this way. What your work, or the essence of, your work or your message, you have so many different ones, it's hard, but how is that relevant to people on the street today? Is there anything, the average person?
I mean, they're dealing with the same problems of life and death and health and wholeness and neurosis. So everything that I and my colleagues talked about is relevant. You know, I'm basically, as I said, influenced by American transcendentalism that I read Whitman, and he was a blend of poetry and politics. So I was greatly influenced by Walt Whitman as an archetypal figure of the American bard as opposed to the European one. But I'm basically a walk-in. You know, I come from the Pleiades and I'm here to do a little bit of Peace Corps work with the humans. And I'm pretty much done now, and I'm looking forward to, you know, getting out of here.
All right, great. That's a good note to end. All right, Bill, thanks so much for your time.
Okay, ciao.
Ciao, see you soon. Bye.